Texas, 1910. A 73-year-old black woman stood trapped inside a barn, while the white farmer who had stolen her whole life reached for the last $17 she had left. He thought she was alone. He thought she was weak. He thought age had finished what slavery started. He was wrong. Because out on that dirt road, her son was already coming. The son she had hidden for 24 years. The son who should never have survived. The son a man like John Whitmore believed had no right to exist at all. And before the sun went down over that Texas farm, Whitmore was going to learn something men like him almost never learned in time. An old woman can survive for 50 years on fear, but when fear finally breaks, what comes through the door behind it can look a lot like judgment. The barn smelled of old wood and dry hay. Dust floated through the fading sunlight coming through the boards. Evelyn stood with her back against the wall. Her thin hands trembled at her sides. Not from fear, from age. From 50 years of work that had worn her body down to bone and memory. Across the barn, John Whitmore blocked the door. His face was red, his breath thick with whiskey, his eyes locked on Evelyn like she was something he had misplaced and finally found again. Whitmore had owned this land for 30 years. Before that, his father had owned it, and before his father died, his father had owned Evelyn. 50 years of waking before the sun, 50 years of cotton fields stretching beyond sight. 50 years of cooking meals she would never eat at the same table. 50 years of silence. 50 years of survival. You think you can just walk away? Whitmore's voice was low, dangerous. The kind of quiet tone men used when they believed the world belonged to them. Evelyn said nothing. She had learned long ago that words were weapons she could not afford. Whitmore stepped closer. You got something of mine. His eyes moved slowly down toward her dress. Toward the small hidden pouch tied beneath the fabric. Her heart pounded, because inside that pouch was $17. $17 saved coin by coin, hidden in jars, folded into rags, stolen back from the life that had stolen everything from her. It was the only thing she owned in the world. The only thing that might finally allow her to disappear from this farm. Whitmore reached forward, his fingers closing around her arm, hard. And as the barn door creaked in the evening wind, Evelyn realized something. The past she had survived for 73 years, was about to catch up with her one more time.
Evelyn had been born in 1837. Not in Texas. Not yet. She was born in a one-room cabin behind the Whitmore house. A cabin built for people the law did not call people. Her mother had been brought from Virginia in chains, sold south the same way cattle were sold. No ceremony, no questions, just a price. Evelyn never knew her father. No one told her who he was. And on plantations like Whitmore's, that silence usually meant something ugly. Something no one wanted a child asking about. By the time Evelyn was 6 years old, she was carrying water from the well. Buckets nearly as heavy as her own body. Walking slowly so the white overseer wouldn't accuse her of spilling. By 10, she was already bent over cotton rows. Her fingers bleeding from the burrs. Her back burning beneath the Texas sun. And by 15, she had learned the first rule of plantation life. Nothing you love is safe. One morning her mother was there, cooking at the outdoor fire, humming a song she said came from her own mother before the ocean took them. That afternoon a wagon arrived. 2 men stepped down. They spoke quietly with the Whitmore patriarch. Money changed hands. And by sunset, Evelyn's mother was gone. Sold to pay a gambling debt. Evelyn never saw her again. That is how childhood ended on farms like Whitmore's. Not with age, but with understanding. Years passed. The Civil War came and went like a distant storm. Rumors moved through the fields faster than wind. Lincoln, Union soldiers, freedom. But for Evelyn, freedom arrived as a word before it arrived as a reality. When the Whitmores told the workers they were free, they also told them something else. You can leave if you want, but the roads are dangerous. You got no money. You got no family. And no white man willing to vouch for you. Those sentences were not threats. They were arithmetic. A woman alone in Texas in 1865, with no land, no wages, and no protection, could disappear faster than a footprint in dust. So Evelyn stayed, not because she believed them, because she understood the odds. And when the elder Whitmore died, his son John inherited the farm. John Whitmore was a different kind of man. He didn't shout as often as his father, didn't use the whip in the open yard. But men like him learned something after slavery ended. You didn't need chains anymore. You just needed debt. You let workers borrow against next season's crop. Then charge them for tools. Charge them for food. Charge them for the cabin they slept in. And by the end of the year, they owed you more than they could ever repay. It looked like employment, but everyone living it knew the truth. The cage was still there. It had just been rebuilt with paperwork instead of iron. Evelyn became part of the Whitmore household. Cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, moving through the rooms like a shadow. The Whitmore children called her Auntie. None of them knew her real name. None of them asked. To them she was furniture. Necessary. Invisible. Years passed that way. Quiet. Heavy. Endless. Until one summer evening in 1895, someone new arrived on the Whitmore farm. A man named Samuel. Samuel arrived on the Whitmore farm in the summer of 1895. He was 32 years old, tall, quiet, and he carried himself differently from most of the men Evelyn had known. Not arrogant, not afraid, just steady. He had come from Louisiana, hired to repair the fences along the northern property line. The Whitmore land stretched miles beyond the house, and storms had torn the posts loose along the edges. Samuel worked alone most days, moving slowly down the fence line with a hammer, a shovel, and a small bag of tools. But people noticed him, not because he talked much, because of the way he stood. Like a man who knew something the rest of them didn't. Evelyn first spoke to him at the well. It was late evening, the air still hot from the day. She was lowering a bucket into the water when Samuel walked up behind her to wash the dust from his hands. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then he nodded. Just once. A small gesture. But it carried something Evelyn had not felt in years. Respect. Over the weeks that followed, they spoke in pieces. Short conversations stolen between work. Near the woodpile. Behind the tobacco barn. In those quiet moments before dawn when the world still felt half asleep. Samuel told her about New Orleans. About streets where black men owned barber shops. Where women ran small stores. Where people gathered in cafes reading newspapers and arguing about politics. To Evelyn, it sounded like another country, a place too distant to imagine. She told him almost nothing about her own life. The past was a wound she had learned not to touch. But something grew between them anyway. Not love the way young people imagine it. Something quieter. Something older. Recognition. The shock of meeting someone who saw you clearly, after years of being treated like furniture. In October, Samuel finished repairing the fences. The Whitmores paid him, and he left the farm. Evelyn watched him walk down the dirt road without saying goodbye. That was how people survived here. You learn not to show the shape of what mattered. By December, she knew she was pregnant. The first thing she felt was not joy.
It was terror. Evelyn was 58 years old, her body already worn from decades of labor, and she was carrying a child on land owned by a man who believed everything on that land belonged to him. She had heard the stories all her life. Stories whispered in cabins late at night. Babies taken from their mothers and sold. Children drowned in rivers. Women beaten so badly the child inside them never saw daylight. The war had ended slavery, but cruelty had survived it. Evelyn told no one. For 5 months she hid the pregnancy beneath loose dresses and shawls. She worked slower, but never slow enough for anyone to ask questions. She ate less, saving scraps of food so the child inside her could grow strong. And every night in the small shack behind the Whitmore house, she pressed her hands to her stomach, praying to a God she wasn't entirely sure existed. In May of 1896, the pains began. There was only one person Evelyn trusted, a woman named Ruth who lived 3 miles down the road. Ruth was 70 years old, half-blind, sharp-tongued, and known across the county as a midwife who had delivered more babies than anyone could count. Evelyn walked to her cabin in the middle of the night, stopping every few steps to grip the trees along the road, biting down on her sleeve to keep from crying out. When Ruth opened the door, she took one look at Evelyn and said nothing. She simply stepped aside. The baby was born at dawn, a boy, small, but strong. He had Samuel's eyes, and Evelyn's high cheekbones. Ruth wrapped him in an old flour sack and handed him to her. "You keeping him?" Evelyn looked down at the child. Perfect. Impossibly perfect. "Yes." Ruth nodded slowly. Then she said the only thing that mattered. "Then you best hide him good." Isaiah could not grow up on the Whitmore farm. Not if he was going to survive. Ruth understood that before Evelyn even asked. The morning after the boy was born, she wrapped him tighter in the flour sack and said only one thing: "Leave him with me." Evelyn's heart nearly broke hearing it, but she knew Ruth was right. If Whitmore ever discovered the child, the boy would not live long enough to learn his own name. So Isaiah grew up 3 miles away, in Ruth's crooked little cabin near the tree line. To the outside world he was just another orphaned relative, a distant nephew, a child someone had taken in out of pity. But every few nights, long after the Whitmore house had gone dark, Evelyn walked the dirt road, 3 miles through woods and fields, sometimes in rain, sometimes in cold, sometimes so tired her legs trembled with every step, just to see her son. She would sit beside his bed in the dim light of a kerosene lamp, teaching him the letters she had learned in secret years before. A, B, C, tracing them slowly in the dirt with her finger. She told him stories, too. Stories about his father, about the world beyond the farm, about cities where black men owned shops and read newspapers and walked streets without asking permission. Isaiah listened to every word. But as he grew older, Evelyn began to notice something in him. Anger. Not loud anger. Not the kind that explodes. The quiet kind. The kind that sits inside a person and waits. When Isaiah was 12, he came back from town one afternoon with a split lip. He had refused to step off the sidewalk for a white man. Evelyn cleaned the blood from his face with shaking hands. "You can't fight them," she told him. "They'll kill you." Isaiah stared at the floor. Then he said the words every young man eventually says. "That ain't right." Evelyn sighed. "Don't matter if it's right," she said softly. "It matters if you stay alive." But staying alive required more than obedience. It required strength. And Ruth knew it. When Isaiah turned 13, she took him to see a man named Elijah. Elijah lived in a small shack at the edge of the woods. No one knew exactly how old he was. Some said 80, others said older.
His face was a map of scars. His knuckles twisted from decades of fighting. He had run away from slavery as a teenager, ridden freight trains across half the country, fought bare-knuckle boxing matches in Missouri and Kansas for white men who bet on blood. And somehow, he had lived long enough to grow old. Elijah looked Isaiah up and down the first time they met. Then he nodded once. This boy needs to know how to stand. And so the lessons began. At first light, behind Elijah's shack. How to plant your feet. How to read a man's shoulders before he swings. How to move sideways instead of backward. How to take a punch without falling. How to end a fight before it becomes something worse. But Elijah taught him more than fighting. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the pines, Elijah said something Isaiah never forgot. White folks think we animals. They think we don't feel nothing. That's how they sleep at night. Isaiah wiped sweat from his brow, listening carefully. But you got to know something, Elijah continued. You a man. Whole man. Don't matter what laws they write. You got the right to stand. Isaiah thought about that. Then he said the only answer that made sense to a boy growing up in East Texas. Standing gets you killed. Elijah nodded slowly. Sometimes, he said, but crawling kills you slower. Isaiah never forgot those words. And by the time he turned 24, he had become something Whitmore had never expected to face. A man who knew exactly how to stand. Isaiah never forgot those words. And by 1910, he had grown into the kind of man Elijah had hoped he would become. Tall, broad-shouldered, calm in a way that unsettled people who expected fear. When Evelyn told him Whitmore planned to throw her out, he did not shout. He did not argue. He simply stood up. Then we leave tonight. Evelyn shook her head slowly. It ain't that simple. He knows I got money saved. He'll come after me. Isaiah's jaw tightened. Let him. For 24 years he had lived in the shadows, hidden, careful, silent. Because that was what survival required. But something inside him had reached its limit. 3 days later, Whitmore came looking for her. Late afternoon. The sun low over the fields. The barn half filled with gold dust from the fading light. Evelyn was gathering the few things she owned. A spare dress. A tin cup. A Bible she could not read but refused to throw away. Then the door creaked open behind her. Whitmore stepped inside. You got something that belongs to me. Evelyn's heart pounded. But she kept her back straight. I don't have nothing of yours. Whitmore stepped closer. Hand over the money. I earned it. Whitmore laughed. Cold. Ugly. You didn't earn a damn thing. His hand shot out and grabbed her arm. Hard. Everything you got. I let you have. Evelyn gasped. Let go of me. Whitmore leaned closer. His breath thick with whiskey. Give me the money, or I swear to God. The barn door slammed open. Whitmore froze. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the setting sun. Isaiah. He stepped inside slowly, his fists loose at his sides. His eyes locked on Whitmore. Get your hands off her. Whitmore blinked in confusion. Then recognition spread across his face. Well, I'll be damned, he said. You been hiding a boy all this time. Isaiah didn't answer. He took one step closer. I said let go. Whitmore released Evelyn and stepped back, his hand drifting toward the knife at his belt. You threatening me, boy? Isaiah's voice stayed calm. I'm telling you to walk away. Whitmore lunged, the knife flashing in the dim light. But Isaiah moved faster. Elijah had drilled the motion into him 1,000 times.
Step sideways, turn the shoulder, strike before the second breath. His fist drove into Whitmore's ribs, hard. The knife clattered to the floor. Whitmore stumbled backward, gasping. "You broke my rib," he wheezed. Isaiah stared at him. "I broke too." Outside the barn, voices began to gather. Footsteps, low murmurs. Whitmore's sons burst through the door, rifles in their hands. But then they saw something they had never seen before. They were not alone. Elijah stood in the doorway, leaning on his stick. Behind him stood Ruth. And behind them, more men and women from neighboring farms. Not an army, just witnesses. Earl Whitmore raised his rifle. "I'll shoot you where you stand." Elijah didn't move. "Then shoot. But there's 10 of us here. And more coming." The Whitmore brothers hesitated, looking around for the first time, because something had changed in that barn. People who had spent their lives invisible were choosing to be seen. Whitmore struggled to his feet, blood running from his nose. "You're all dead," he spat. "I'll have the sheriff hang every one of you." "Maybe." But Elijah spoke again. "Everyone here saw what happened. Saw you attack an old woman. Saw you pull a knife on her son. And will testify." The word hung in the air, testify. Whitmore stared at them. Then something inside him cracked. Not bone, something deeper. "Get off my land," he said hoarsely. Isaiah bent down and picked up the small cloth pouch. He placed it gently into Evelyn's hands. $17.
17 years of saving. "Let's go, Mama." Evelyn looked at Whitmore one last time. The man who had owned her childhood, her youth, her middle age. She wanted to speak, to say something that captured 50 years of survival. But there were no words big enough. So she turned and walked out of the barn. That week, 3 families left the Whitmore farm. Then 2 more. By the end of the month, half the workforce was gone. Whitmore tried to replace them. The word had spread. Some stories travel faster than fear. Evelyn moved north with Isaiah, to a small settlement near the Oklahoma border. The land was poor, the houses small, but for the first time in her life, the ground beneath her feet belonged to her family. Years later, Evelyn would sit on the porch of Isaiah's house, watching her grandchildren play in the dust. 5 of them, with a 6th on the way. One evening, she whispered something to Isaiah before she died. "I'm free." Isaiah squeezed her hand. "You always were," he said. The barn where Whitmore fell eventually collapsed. The land was sold, the old farm forgotten. But the story remained, passed through families, whispered in churches, a reminder that dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered. And Evelyn had surrendered nothing.